Okay, so picture this, right? Um, the Texas coast is bracing itself for Hurricane Harvey. The air is thick with tension and the wind is like almost whispering about the coming chaos.
Oh, yeah.
And right in the middle of all this, you have Crystal McDowell, who's this vibrant 37-year-old real estate agent and a mother of two,
Right.
and she just vanishes,
Yeah.
like gone,
Wow.
swallowed by the storm. It's a disappearance that is both, perplexing but also heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So was it just like a tragic twist of fate?
Hmm.
Like the hurricane just kind of took her?
Yeah.
Or is there something more sinister going on here?
Yeah.
Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. So Crystal, she was really radiant. Everyone said so. And she had just kind of started this new chapter in her life.
Oh, okay.
She had recently divorced her husband, Steve,
Uh-huh.
but she was also starting to see this local jeweler named Paul Hargrave.
Oh, wow.
And it was on August 25th, 2017, with Harvey like looming, that she left Paul's house early. And all we have is this simple text to Steve, like just confirming she's heading home, and that's the last anyone ever hears from her.
Oh.
So as the hours turn into days and the hurricane just unleashes like all its fury, the worry for Crystal just grows and grows until it becomes this frantic search for answers,
Yeah.
amidst all the devastation.
Yeah, you can just imagine the worry and then trying to find any kind of information with the storm going on. It's got to be incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack that's also on fire.
Right, exactly.
So we know that Crystal was going through like some pretty major life changes at the time,
Mm-hmm.
a recent divorce, a new relationship, and she was still living with her ex-husband while her new place was being renovated. That's a lot to deal with, even without a hurricane about to hit.
Mm.
So did any of these relationships seem, I don't know, particularly troubled?
Well, I think the relationship with her ex-husband, Steve, is where we start to see some cracks. While he said the divorce was amicable, when you talk to Crystal's family and friends, a different story emerges. They describe him as possessive, like he was really struggling to let go of that life he had with Crystal. Just imagine, like, watching everything you thought your life was going to be just crumble, and you can't do anything to stop it.
Yeah, that definitely paints a pretty unsettling picture. It makes you wonder if, under the surface of that amicable divorce, there's all this resentment bubbling, like maybe a feeling of betrayal that grew as Crystal moved on.
Right. And that's what makes this so interesting, right? What makes a person snap? What pushes them from heartbreak into, well, something much darker?
Yeah, it's a chilling thought. And we can't forget, this is just one part of the story. We also have Paul, the new boyfriend. What's his role in all of this? I mean, they weren't together that long.
Right. Yeah, it was still pretty new, which just makes everything even more complicated. And at first, Paul didn't even mention that he had security footage of Crystal leaving his house the morning she vanished. That omission, whether it was on purpose or not, immediately raised red flags.
Yeah, it's definitely suspicious. Why wouldn't you just come forward with that right away?
Yeah.
It seems like something that could have, helped figure out her movements that morning.
Exactly. It makes you ask, was he hiding something or was he just freaked out and not thinking straight? There's a hurricane coming. Maybe his judgment wasn't the best, but, investigators couldn't rule out that he was hiding something.
So we've got the ex-husband who's maybe not over things, and a new boyfriend acting a little shady. It's starting to sound like a love triangle gone wrong.
Yeah, it could be.
But then there's also Crystal's uncle, Jeff Walters. He's the one who reported her missing, right?
That's right.
What's his part in all this?
Well, Jeff, he's an interesting character. He was super involved in looking for Crystal, but he was so intense, almost obsessed with being part of every development in the case, that it started to make people wonder.
What do you mean?
I mean, some people thought it was just like family love. He was desperate to find his niece.
Yeah.
But others saw it as him trying to control everything, like he wanted to steer the investigation in a specific direction.
Almost like he was trying to, be at the center of it all, maybe even diverting attention from, I don't know, someone or something.
Exactly. His behavior definitely raised questions. Was it genuine worry or was something else going on? We got to consider everything.
So we've got three people with secrets, maybe even motives. The investigators must have had their hands full. What happened next? Did they find anything that pointed them in a particular direction?
Well, as the days went by and the hurricane's impact started to lessen, a really crucial piece of evidence popped up, and it completely shifted the focus of everything. Crystal's car was found abandoned in a Motel 6 parking lot.
Abandoned. It seems like if you were going to steal a car, you'd try to be a bit more sneaky. especially with a hurricane going on. It's almost too obvious, isn't it?
It is, and that's what made it so strange. It was like the car was put there on purpose, like a staged disappearance, trying
Wow.
to throw the investigators off.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. The storm, which seemed like a problem for the investigation at first, actually helped preserve some key evidence.
Oh, tell me more about that.
You see, all the flooding from Harvey actually trapped Crystal's car in that motel parking lot. And because of that, no one could mess with it. Whatever evidence was in or around that car, it stayed untouched. It was like a silent record of what happened before the storm hit. And as the investigators went through it all, they made a chilling discovery. Security footage from nearby businesses showed Steve, Crystal's ex-husband, getting out of her car. Then he just calmly goes and buys a bicycle from a Walmart to ride home.
Hold on, he's caught on camera getting out of her car and then riding away on a bike. That seems pretty incriminating, doesn't it? I mean, wasn't that enough to arrest him?
You'd think, right. But there's another twist. Even with the seemingly clear evidence, Steve wouldn't confess. He kept saying he was innocent. So the investigators knew they needed a different approach. They had to break through his act, appeal to something deeper.
This is where it gets interesting. So what did they do? Did they confront him with the footage? Threaten him with a longer sentence if he didn't talk?
They decided to try something more psychological. They knew a direct confrontation might make him more stubborn.
Makes sense.
So they reached out to Crystal's Aunt Cindy. She was known for being compassionate, someone who could connect with people on a deeper level.
Oh, okay.
They asked her to just spend time with Steve, listen to him, hoping he'd let his guard down and tell her something. It was risky, kind of walking a line between empathy and, manipulation, but they thought it was necessary to get to the truth.
That's a smart move. Appealing to his emotions instead of his logic. It sounds like something out of a movie. Did it work? Did Steve finally crack?
It did. Aunt Cindy, with her patience and compassion, wore down Steve's defenses. He finally broke down and confessed to her. He said, "I just can't do this anymore." And that little admission, whispered in a moment of weakness, changed everything. It led him to confess everything to the investigators.
Wow, that must have been an intense moment for everyone involved. So what did he say? What really happened that day?
Steve confessed that when Crystal got home that morning, they had this huge fight. It all stemmed from his resentment, and not being able to cope with the divorce. And in a moment of rage, he strangled her. And then when he realized what he'd done, the horror of it all, he just panicked and tried to cover everything up.
It's just horrifying to think someone could act so impulsively, so violently, and then try to make it all disappear. So what did he do with Crystal's body?
He put her body in trash bags and drove to a remote area in the woods. He was desperate to get rid of any trace of what he'd done. He thought he'd planned the perfect cover-up, thought the hurricane would swallow up his crime, but, well, it seems fate had other plans.
It really does show you that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for the truth to come out. So did they ever find her body? Did Steve face justice?
Yes, they did. Using Steve's confession, investigators searched that wooded area, determined to bring some peace to Crystal's family. After 28 long and agonizing days, they found her remains. It was the end of the search, but also the start of a long and painful road to justice.
I can't even imagine what Crystal's family went through during those 28 days not knowing. And then to have it confirmed, it must have been devastating. So, did Steve go to trial for Crystal's murder?
He did, and the trial was tense, full of emotion. It was a battle between the prosecution's fight for justice and Steve trying desperately to lessen the consequences of what he did. His defense team tried to say that Crystal's death was an accident, a tragic result of an argument that got out of hand.
Oh, so they were trying to make it look like he acted out of fear and grief, not malice.
Exactly. They argued that Steve, overcome with guilt and confused by the hurricane, panicked and made bad choices trying to cover up an unintentional death.
So did the jury buy that? Were they swayed by the accidental death claim?
The prosecution was ready for that. They meticulously broke apart Steve's story, presenting a mountain of evidence that showed a completely different picture.
Oh, wow.
They pointed to his history of being possessive, his obsessive attempts to control Crystal's life even after the divorce, and the calculated steps he took to make her disappearance look like something it wasn't. They argued this wasn't a crime of passion, it was premeditated, a chilling example of domestic violence turning fatal.
It really does seem like the classic case of a controlling personality turning violent when they realize they can't control the person anymore.
It does.
So did the jury believe his story, Or did they see through it?
The jury had a tough job. They had to figure out the truth from all the conflicting stories and deal with the emotional weight of the evidence. But they only took 3.5 hours to come to a decision. And it was a clear rejection of Steve's claim of an accident.
Oh, wow.
They found him guilty of murder.
Wow. So justice was served. But at what cost? It's a sad kind of victory, you know? Tainted by the loss of a life that didn't need to end. What was his sentence?
The judge, taking into account the awful nature of the crime and the devastating impact on Crystal's family, sentenced Steve to 50 years in prison.
50 years. It's a long time, but it can't truly make up for the loss of a life. What about Crystal's kids? What happened to them after all of this?
Crystal's 2 children, Madden and Maui, their lives were forever changed by what happened that summer. But they were lucky enough to be taken in by a close family friend who could offer them stability and love as they heal and grow. It's a small bit of light in all the darkness. You know, it shows how resilient people can be and the enduring power of love. Their lives will always be marked by this tragedy, but they have people around them who are determined to support them, honor their mother's memory, and help them through their grief and healing.
It's inspiring to see that kind of strength in the face of such a horrible tragedy.
It is.
And it's a reminder that behind the headlines of the court cases, there are real people whose lives are shattered by violence. And while justice is important, it can never truly heal the wounds left behind.
You're right. These tragedies have a ripple effect. They impact families, communities, even society as a whole.
Absolutely. They force us to look at the darker side of human nature, the potential for darkness that exists in seemingly ordinary lives.
Right. And I think that's a good place to stop for today. We'll pick up with the rest of Crystal's story in part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds good. I'm already hooked. See you then.
See you then. You know, going back to this case, it's kind of eerie how the hurricane almost becomes this, like, a metaphor.
Oh, how so?
Well, you know, it's like the storm's fury reflects the turmoil that was going on inside Steve, and the destruction left behind by the hurricane is a kind of echo of the shattered lives.
That's a pretty powerful image. The storm as like a physical representation of Steve's inner demons.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, did the hurricane embolden him in some way? You know, like give him this sense of anonymity. Like he thought he could get away with it because of all the chaos.
It's definitely a possibility. Think about it. Disasters, they disrupt everything, right?
Absolutely.
The social order gets messed up, boundaries get blurred, rules get kind of thrown out the window. And in that kind of environment, someone who's already prone to violence might feel, I don't know, like they've got more freedom to act. Like the normal things that hold them back are gone.
It's a disturbing thought that a natural disaster could create the perfect conditions for criminal behavior.
Yeah, it's not something you'd want to think about too much.
For sure. But let's talk about the investigation itself for a minute. We talked about the challenges the hurricane created, but I'm curious about the methods they used to like actually piece together what happened. You know, how did they manage to like cut through all the chaos and zero in on Steve?
Well, one of the most important things in any murder investigation is figuring out the timeline. So the investigators had to reconstruct Crystal's last days. They talked to her friends, family, coworkers, looked at phone records, security footage, just to try and get a complete picture of her movements and who she interacted with.
So it's like putting together a puzzle,
Yeah,
looking for those missing pieces that tell the whole story.
exactly.
So what did they find out? What were the specific things that made them suspect Steve?
One of the big breakthroughs came from looking at Crystal's phone records.
Uh-huh.
They found all these calls and texts between her and Steve in the hours before she disappeared. And while the messages weren't like directly threatening or anything, they showed this pattern of like Steve becoming more and more possessive.
It's crazy how it's often those little things, the details you might not even think about, that end up being the most important clues.
It's true. And did they find any other like digital clues that pointed to Steve?
Oh, they did. Remember how Crystal was active on social media?
Hmm.
Well, the investigators saw that her activity just stopped suddenly the morning she disappeared.
Really?
Yeah. And that along with her not talking to friends or family, it was like a big red flag. It pointed to something really wrong happening.
Yeah, it's like a digital sign that something's not right, like someone trying to like wipe their slate clean, disappear from the online world.
Exactly.
Huh.
So you've got the digital trail leading to Steve, plus the growing tension in their communication, and that security footage of him driving your car. It all starts to paint a pretty damning picture.
It does. But they still needed more, something concrete to really make the case against him.
Right. So what do?
Well, they turned to DNA analysis.
Okay.
It's one of the most powerful tools in forensics. They went over Crystal's car, Steve's house, that area in the woods where they eventually found her body, just hoping to find something, anything, that could tie Steve to the crime.
It's like searching for a needle in a haystack, but on a microscopic level.
Yeah, it is.
So, did they find anything that definitively proved he was involved?
You remember that trash bag they found, the one with traces of Crystal's DNA on it? Yeah. Well, when they did more testing, they found that the DNA profile also partially matched Steve.
Wow, that's huge. Like finding the smoking gun, but in DNA form.
Exactly. That DNA evidence, along with everything else, the digital trail, the security footage, and his confession, just locked the case shut. There was no way to deny his guilt.
It's amazing how, even with a natural disaster messing things up, even when the evidence is scattered and the timeline is all jumbled, the truth still managed to come out.
It really is. It shows how dedicated the investigators were, the power of science, and the belief that justice can be served.
So we have all the evidence, the guilty verdict, the 50-year sentence. But what about the people left behind? Crystal's family, friends, the community? How do they cope with this tragedy?
We can't forget that every true crime case, every headline, every court decision affects real people whose lives are changed forever by violence. Crystal's family and friends, they suffered a loss that no amount of justice can truly heal.
It's a reminder that while the legal system can hold people accountable, it can't take away the pain, the grief, the emptiness that stays with people, even after the case is closed.
And we shouldn't forget about the investigators either, the ones who put in countless hours to uncover the truth. They had to deal with the wreckage of a life cut short. They had to look into the darkest parts of human nature.
It must take a toll on them, carrying the weight of all that pain and knowing what people are capable of doing to each other.
It does.
But they do it because they believe in justice, in holding people responsible for their actions and speaking for those who can't speak for themselves.
That's right.
Their dedication, their unwavering commitment to finding the truth, it really shows you the strength of the human spirit. The belief that even in the darkest times, light can be found, and justice, even if it's imperfect, can still prevail.
And that's, I think, a good place to pause for today. We'll continue our deep dive into Crystal's case in part 3. It's really unsettling, like the hurricane almost becomes this symbol, a reflection of the storm that was brewing inside Steve.
I see what you mean.
The hurricane's rage, it mirrors his internal struggles, and the devastation left behind, well, it echoes the shattered lives, right?
Yeah, it's a powerful image. The storm as like a physical representation of his inner demons.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, did the hurricane, I don't know, maybe embolden him in a way? Give him a false sense of security? Like he thought he could get away with it because of all the chaos.
It's possible. I mean, disasters, they change everything, don't they?
Yeah, fierce.
They disrupt the social order, boundaries get blurred, rules, well, they don't seem to matter as much. And in that kind of environment, someone who's already capable of violence might feel, I don't know, maybe a sense of freedom. Like the things that normally hold them back are gone.
That's a really chilling thought. That a natural disaster could actually, create the perfect conditions for someone to commit a crime.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough thing to think about.
It is. But I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about the investigation. We've talked about, how the hurricane made things difficult, but I'm really curious about the techniques the investigators used to, figure out what happened. How do they cut through all that chaos and zero in on Steve as the main suspect?
Well, in any murder investigation, establishing a timeline is crucial, right? So the investigators, they basically had to reconstruct Crystal's final days. They talked to everyone, friends, family, co-workers. They went over phone records, analyzed security footage, all to try and create this detailed account of her movements and who she interacted with.
So it's like piecing together a giant puzzle.
Exactly. Looking for those missing pieces that reveal the bigger picture.
So what did they find? What were the key details that pointed them towards Steve?
One of the biggest breakthroughs, it came from analyzing Crystal's phone records. The investigators, they found a bunch of calls and texts between Crystal and Steve in the hours before she disappeared. And the content of those messages, while they weren't directly threatening, they did show this pattern of Steve becoming more and more possessive.
It's incredible, right? How those little things, the details you might not even think are important, those are the things that often crack a case wide open.
It's true.
So did they find any other digital clues?
Oh, they did. Remember how active Crystal was on social media?
Yeah. very active.
Well, the investigators noticed her activity just stopped completely the morning she disappeared.
Wow.
And that, along with the lack of any communication with friends and family, it was a huge red flag, right? It suggested something really bad had happened.
Yeah, it's like a digital version of going off the grid. It's like someone's deliberately trying to, like, disappear,
Yeah.
wipe themselves from the online world.
Yeah. Exactly. So you've got this digital trail leading to Steve, the growing tension in their communication, the security footage of him driving her car. It all starts to paint a pretty clear picture, right?
It does. But they still needed more, something solid, to really make the case.
Right. So they turned to DNA analysis.
Okay.
You know, one of the most powerful tools forensic investigators have. They went over Crystal's car, Steve's house, the wooded area where they eventually found her, looking for, any trace evidence that could connect him to the crime.
Like a microscopic treasure hunt.
It really is.
So did they find anything? Anything conclusive?
They did. You remember that trash bag, the one with Crystal's DNA on it?
Yeah.
Well, they did more testing, and it turns out that DNA profile also partially matched Steve.
Oh, wow. That's it then, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the nail in the coffin.
So you've got the DNA evidence, the digital trail, the security footage, and then, of course, Steve's confession. It's an airtight case.
Yeah, there's no room for doubt.
It's really incredible to me how even with the hurricane, disrupting everything, scattering evidence, jumbling the timeline, the truth still came out.
It's a testament to the dedication of the investigators, the power of forensic science, and the unwavering belief that justice has to be served.
Absolutely. And, as we think about Crystal's story, about the tragic loss of such a vibrant life, about the strength of her family and friends, and the relentless pursuit of justice that ultimately held her killer accountable, I keep coming back to the importance of awareness.
Yeah.
Recognizing the signs of domestic violence, speaking up when something doesn't seem right, and creating a culture where victims feel safe coming forward and asking for help.
I agree. Domestic violence, it thrives in silence, in the shadows of secrecy and shame. It's up to us to bring this issue into the light, to educate ourselves and our communities, and to work toward a world where everyone feels safe and respected in their relationships.
Crystal's legacy, it lives on, not just in the memories of those who loved her, but also in the ongoing fight to prevent future tragedies like this, to break the cycle of violence, and to make sure that no one else has to suffer what she went through.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And let's not forget that behind every statistic, behind every headline, there's a human story, a life full of hopes and dreams and the potential for a brighter future. It's our responsibility to remember those lives, to learn from these tragedies, and to work to create a world where violence like this isn't tolerated anymore.
And to our listeners, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. You're not alone. There are resources out there. And there is hope for a better future.
Remember, silence only protects the abuser. Speaking up can save lives.
This has been a really powerful deep dive. A case that highlights the complexities of relationships, the devastating effects of domestic violence, and the importance of fighting for justice for those whose voices have been silenced.
It's been a privilege to discuss this case with you and to shed some light on an issue that deserves all of our attention and action.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle and our YouTube channel for more deep dives like this one. We'll see you next time.
Stay safe and stay curious.